So we're going to jump back into Jarnail Singh's testimony where they're analysing his summary, or the team's summary, of the Seema Misra case, and they certainly make a lot of claims there. Interestingly, they do admit in there that no computer system's perfect and that they're all prone to error as well. Why they were still trotting out the line it was robust and not using that then is beyond us, because that's clearly what they were saying internally at this point. But he does characterise the challenges to Horizon and the integrity of the data as a desperate distraction technique to try to avoid convictions, when he seems to suggest that, in his view, their original defence has failed, despite computer errors always being brought up initially, particularly in the case we're talking about. Let's see what he has to say and jump into the inquiry.
Can we go back to the beginning of the email then and look at the content? Page 1, please. Mrs. Misra continues to protest her innocence in the media. The summary below shows that there was ample evidence to justify a conviction. That was still your belief, was it, in June 2014?
No, absolutely.
Why did you write it then?
Because that was the job I was asked to do. I was asked to summarise.
It was your job to say things you didn't believe.
Well,
I mean, this is going beyond any stretch of credibility here. That sentence, it's been written by him, he's admitting it. It's almost his introduction to the email there. But now kind of suggesting, well, I was asked to summarise, I'm guessing what he's trying to suggest there, summarise the post office's view on this case rather than the view that I knew to be correct, is a bit mind-blowing, really. So he's either done that, as he says, which sounds incredible, or he actually did hold the view and thinks that won't look good now, so I'm changing my mind.
I can't answer that. I mean, at that time, I wrote it, and now I regret it, I suppose.
Well, I'm asking you why you wrote it, not whether you regret it now.
I don't know. I was asked to summarise it, and with the help of other people, I summarised it.
But sounds like didn't summarise the case, but summarised the narrative being put out about the case, and there is a subtle but significant difference there.
So you asked earlier, why didn't I put a summary? There it is. The summary below shows, and a lot of the people who made a contribution towards it obviously made a contribution to assist me at that time.
But you're adopting this as your work. There's nothing on this that tells the reader that this isn't you speaking here.
No. When you do work, you have a lot of researchers, don't you? Do you actually put their names to every single thing that some people made a contribution towards it? It's a team effort. People who knows whose work it is because they worked with me at that time. It wasn't an individual. I couldn't sit down and churn that out within, 2 hours or 3 hours or a day when I was asked to do it. So the only way I could get the work done, it was to, seek a contributions from the people who could help, and they did, and here we are.
Which is fine seeking their contributions, but not to turn around and say, I'm not putting that in my name, in my email, because I don't agree with it. It is incredible.
You say the Misra case at Guildford Crown Court in 2009 to 2010, as far as I am aware, is the only criminal trial where a jury's been required to consider in detail the integrity of the Horizon system. Paragraph 2 is a cut and paste of your earlier email. 3, Mrs. Misra claimed that although she was guilty of false accounting, she'd not stolen the money whose loss she had concealed. She suggested that one possible reason why the money appeared to be missing might be computer error. The jury heard from expert witnesses for the Crown and defence. Their evidence was sufficiently detailed as to have lasted 2 full days. The jury's verdict showed that it was sure that computer error played no role in the case. There has been no appeal against conviction.
Well, now in the bold light of day, I mean, that's been shown to be a misstep, hasn't it? But obviously the jury will be influenced by what they've heard from the expert witnesses. I'm guessing one of them was Gareth Jenkins.
And then over the page, please. The defence made very wide-ranging requests for disclosure, and the prosecution was asked to review material relating to a number of other offices where subpostmasters had made complaints about Horizon. That disclosure process was fraught with difficulties, mainly because the disclosure requests were unfocused and often irrelevant. If we'd complied with every disclosure request, the investigation department would probably have been paralysed for 6 months, the investigators being unable to deal with any other work.
Surely the department should have just been disclosing everything in the first place, then presumably there wouldn't need to be additional disclosure requests. And it's obviously not for the people launching the prosecution at the post office to decide what is unfocused and irrelevant. It would be up to the defence to decide if it was relevant to their case or not, and to do that they've got to see it.
I'm aware that Mrs. Misra continues to protest her innocence via the media and that she's one of a number of vocal critics of Horizon. It's perhaps worthwhile setting out the facts of her case and what happened at trial, because some of the critical reports of the case have not been accurate. You set out in paragraph 6 what happened in the audit. In 7, a plea and case management hearing. And then 8, when Mrs. Misra's case was listed for trial in June 2009, she brought to court material from the internet detailing a number of complaints about the Horizon system made by former subpostmasters. The Post Office Limited agreed to an adjournment of the trial to allow the defence to pursue this new line of inquiry, even though it was likely that Mrs. Misra was jumping on a bandwagon now that she had finally realised her original defence didn't work.
But she always said there was problems with the computer, and again we see that phrase bandwagon coming up. It's got his fingerprints all over it, this phrase, because he sends it out so many times in so many different contexts, regardless of who is contributing. So unless every single one of his emails is coming from the same contributor, then it would make sense that it's either his phrase or it's a phrase that was in clear and general usage at the post office at the time.
So it was still your view in June 2014 that Mrs. Misra was a bandwagon jumper, is that right?
I think hindsight is, if I'd known what I know now, then obviously no. But the thing is that no, that was not the case. But it was, like I said, a teamwork, or people who knew the case made a contribution towards it, and I think it was decided to put it in. But certainly, it wasn't my decision to put it in. Let's put it that way. I certainly wouldn't have thought of that originally, now, or any time, because that's not the way I write. I mean, as you know, rightly say, I'm not that good at typing. I'm not very good at putting something that together. But that's why I'm probably one of those can't work without a team. I'm not a guy who can just come and work. I knew every time I did something in life, or certainly in the profession, I always had people around me. I mean, I can do certain things very well, certain things not so well, and if I don't, I have people who can. So I put a sort of team together to be able to exist, and then certainly, hopefully, to do a job or do the work to a high standard, and that's what I've done. It was a team effort.
You continue in paragraph 9. Mrs. Misra changed solicitors. There then followed a difficult period when the Post Office Limited was subjected to an avalanche of disclosure requests. We were also served with a series of so-called interim reports by a newly instructed defence expert called Professor Charles McLachlan. These reports raised theoretical possibilities of things that might go wrong with Horizon. The reports contained no evidence for the theories and no explanation as to why any of these theories might be relevant to the West Byfleet office. Our efforts to control these disclosure requests fell on deaf ears. We repeatedly made the point that the case was not about whether the Horizon system was perfect. No computer system can be perfect, and errors can arise on any system.
Important admission there, because literally at this time, I believe they were still trotting out the Horizon's very robust, there aren't any bugs issue. Maybe they should have clarified that to no computer system can be perfect and errors can arise in any system, but obviously that would cast doubt on the so-called cast iron proof that the post office was getting from Horizon via Fujitsu.
The issue was whether anything had gone wrong at West Byfleet. The person who would know that was Mrs. Misra. At the very least, she'd be able to identify what sort of problems she'd encountered and where on the accounts the deficiencies were emerging. She'd know this because she would have physically checked the stock against the computer records. I'm going to come back to that belief that you had, that it's the subpostmaster who would know most about the operation of Horizon later. 10, it emerged in the trial that in spite of our requests for a focused approach, defence expert Professor McLachlan had never sought any information from Mrs. Misra. His theories were simply his own. Mrs. Misra had given him no guidance whatsoever as to what might be going wrong at West Byfleet. The Post Office Limited instructed their own expert, Mr. Jenkins from Fujitsu. This was a turning point in the case. Professor McLachlan fairly conceded that Mr. Jenkins had given him very great assistance in understanding Horizon. Mr. Jenkins was able to explain to Professor McLachlan how many of his theories were not valid and based on a misunderstanding of Horizon. Mr. Jenkins advised that the only way to assess any problems at West Byfleet was to obtain the transaction logs and to examine them for potential problems. Obtaining the logs was expensive and their analysis was time-consuming. However, after both experts had completed their analysis, neither could find evidence of any computer error whatsoever. that could have contributed to the deficiency. In his evidence, 12 to the jury, Professor McLachlan conceded that all of the theoretical problems he had raised were now irrelevant. He abandoned most of his theories after being assisted to a better understanding by Mr. Jenkins. Other theories he had checked against the transaction logs and had found to be baseless. In a nutshell, his final conclusion was this: he hadn't found any problem, that there might still have been a problem that he and Jenkins might have missed. The jury clearly rejected this as wishful thinking after considering all of the evidence in the case.
And I guess if it's characterised like that, I mean, you probably would be fairly inclined as a jury member to reject it.
13, about 3 lines in, she, that's Mrs. Misra, was on the scene to witness the symptoms of any computer problem, while the experts could only trawl through the data long after the event. Any sensible sub-postmaster would have hunted high and low to ascertain where in the accounts the losses were occurring.
I mean, that's unfair. I mean, she's not a computer expert. She's busy running a post office. It's really an unfair characterisation. The people who are best placed are absolutely Fujitsu, who developed the system and hold all the data from the system. So that is a bit of a spurious claim, really, that actually the sub-postmasters are the most responsible for this. No, they didn't choose to use Horizon. They didn't choose to have it developed. They didn't choose who developed it. They didn't choose what help they got with it. They didn't have any access to the data. So suggesting that they should actually be hunting high and low, well, you should have let them then by giving them access to all the data that they needed and requested, rather than complaining that they're asking for too much.
A sub-postmaster should be able to find the location of the problem, even if they could not solve it. Mrs. Misra had not made any such rigorous checks. She had simply accepted each loss, rather than declare the deficiency in the monthly balance, as she was required to do. She'd hidden it by false accounting. Over the page, if we go to paragraph 17, it can be seen from this summary there was ample evidence to justify a conviction. The jury was entitled to conclude that there was only one sensible reason for Mrs. Misra to cook the books, to hide her own stealing. An honest sub-postmaster would have reported the loss immediately. This is what they're required to do. It's also the obvious step out of self-interest. At the very least, it would nip any problem in the bud and limit the amount of money the sub-postmaster might have to repay. Also, if a genuine problem was found with the computer system, there'd be no question of repayment. Mrs. Misra claimed that she had not wanted to lose the post office, and that was why she'd been so secretive. This ignored the obvious fact she'd allowed the loss to grow to such a catastrophic amount that it would have been better to give the business away. The jury was entitled to reject her evidence as absurd and to conclude that her belated attack on Horizon was nothing but a desperate distraction technique. Was that your view in June 2014, that Mrs. Misra's questions as to the integrity of the Horizon data were nothing but a desperate distraction tactic?
No.
So why did you write it?
I didn't. It was, as I say, it was a team effort. It was a unit. Somebody wanted a summary of what happened in year 2010 at the trial, and that's basically bringing them up to date to what happened in the Misra case.
So who in the team was responsible for this effort?
It was joint effort put together by a number of people, I think. I more or less told you the people who were involved in it, who had a hand in it, and that's basically all I can help assist you with.
Well, it wouldn't be acceptable to conclude no one's responsible because they can't identify an individual person. If you're saying the entire criminal law team is responsible for it, then they've all got to take a portion of that responsibility, surely.
Was it representative of an underlying assumption by that team, even in June 2014, that sub-postmasters raising Horizon issues during investigations were lying about the causes of losses at their branch and were doing so as part of a distraction technique?
No.